Hi class, I wanted to go over the proposal essay. I wanted to explain it a little bit more in depth. So you can go ahead and find the instructions under the proposal essay module, and of course you can also find the instructions under the proposal essay assignment, which is right here. So here we have the instructions. As you can see, the assignment is worth 100 points, and this essay is also an argumentative essay. All the essays that we write in this class are argumentative, which means that you have to convince your audience of, in this essay in particular, you have to convince your audience of two things. One, you have to convince them that this is a real problem, and you have to convince them that your solution is a feasible, realistic, and the best solution to solve the problem. So in the first essay, you basically just had to argue for your position and support your claim. In this essay, it's a little bit different because, like I said, you're arguing first that this is a problem. So you're trying to convince people that this is a problem that matters. And then you're also trying to convince people that this is the best solution to solve that problem. And a third thing that you're trying to convince people to do with this essay is you are trying to convince them to take action. So if we go ahead and look at the instructions, one of the first things you want to take into consideration is that you should be careful when selecting a topic. The topic should not be too complex, nor should it be too broad. So avoid topics like world hunger or world peace, simply because those topics are massive topics that really are very difficult to solve. And this essay is only 2 to 3 pages, so the rationale behind it is, if people haven't solved this yet, how are we going to solve it in 2 to 3 pages, right? And the same rules apply as the first essay. Try to avoid topics that deal with religious beliefs, subjective opinion, also matters of personal beliefs or opinion. Try to avoid those. For example, if you think that something is a problem just because it doesn't fit your beliefs, then that really wouldn't be considered a problem. So you have to pick a problem that applies to society. Which brings me to my other point. Try to avoid personal problems. Sometimes I have people who want to write about a personal problem, but the topic for this essay, like I said, should affect society in some way, and your solution should apply to society as well. So we're not looking at personal problems or personal solutions or anything like that. And like I was saying earlier, try to avoid topics that are subjective or deal with matters of opinion and things like that. Like, for example, the death penalty. The death penalty, you could argue, is a problem based on economics and society in terms of crime and things like that. But you cannot really argue that it's a problem from a religious standpoint, simply because not everybody shares those religious beliefs. Also, another problem like obesity. A lot of people say, well, the solution is to exercise, but again, you have to think about, how are you going to enforce that? How are you going to make sure that people exercise, right? So your solution, when you're thinking about it, should be feasible, realistic, and it should be able to be enforced in some way. So think about that as well. And to be honest with you, the hardest part of this assignment is the solution, because I think it's fairly easy to come up with a problem, because there are a lot of problems out there in this world, but the solution is the one that is going to require a lot more thought, because you have to come up with a detailed solution, and you have to explain how it works, and you have to defend it as well. So let's go ahead and look at how to organize your essay. When you're organizing your essay, what you want to do first is you want to analyze and define the problem. And what I mean by this is you want to go ahead and show what the problem is. Explain the problem to people so that they understand what exactly you're talking about. Explain who it affects, and also go ahead and talk about why it matters. Try to show how it affects several people. For example, if we look at an issue like parking, right? Like, let's suppose parking is an issue at a DACC campus. Well, how does that affect people? If you think about it, parking is the first place that we visit when we arrive to school. So what happens if you are driving around, you can't find parking, you are wasting gas, which means you're wasting money, which money is a huge issue for a lot of college students, right? So that's how it's affecting them. Also, it affects their attitude. driving around looking for parking can be very frustrating. Once you finally find parking, you get to class, you might be angry, you might be frustrated, so you're not really ready to learn, which can interfere with your learning and the absorption of information. Also, sometimes the lack of parking can lead people to being late. So again, what happens if you're late? If a student is late to class, sometimes they miss information, they miss a quiz, it affects their grade. So that's what I mean by analyzing the problem, that you actually delve into it and you show why it's a real problem, who it affects, and how it affects them. After you've established that this is a problem, because remember, you have to explain the problem first, and you have to argue that this is a real problem before people can accept your solution. So after you've established the problem, go ahead and talk about your solution. Now for the solution, you have to be very, very direct, and you have to be very detailed. So go ahead and talk about how much it costs. It could cost money, it could cost time, it could cause physical demands. What type of costs are you talking about? Also make sure that you talk about the time frame. How long is it going to take to carry out the solution? Talk about who's involved. If money is required, who is going to pay for this, right? If you're going to raise taxes, by how much? If your solution requires that you raise tuition, by how much? So try to be as detailed as possible when it comes to your solution, because like I said, this is the one that should really require the most thought and analysis. Also with your solution, it's okay if it requires steps, but keep in mind that you shouldn't include more than 3 steps, because if you include more than 3 steps, people are not going to want to act on your solution, right? Because they're going to say, oh, well, if I have to complete 10 steps to carry out the solution, that's too much. So try to do at least 3 steps. Now your solution might not require any steps, right? So that's fine. But just keep that in mind, that no more than 3 steps. One other thing I wanted to mention was that depending on your problem, your analysis of the problem could be longer. Depending on your problem, the solution might be longer as well. So for some simple topics, like let's say I'm writing about parking at DACC, I could get away with having 1 paragraph where I discuss my problem. I can get away with having 1 paragraph where I discuss my solution. But for more complex topics, you can go ahead and develop this into multiple paragraphs. Also, something I forgot to mention, for this essay, your thesis should include the proposal, your thesis should include the problem and the solution. So go ahead and I'll show you an example right now, but keep that in mind. Your thesis should include the problem and the solution. Okay, so after you've discussed your solution, then you want to go ahead and show why it is the best solution out there and why this will actually solve the problem, right? And one of the things I do want to mention is that even if this does not solve the problem, show that it will at least reduce it. Like if you're talking about teen pregnancy is one of those issues that you can never solve completely, but your goal is to reduce it with this solution. So keep that in mind, that you don't have to argue that your solution is going to solve everything, but you can argue that your solution will reduce the problem. Or you could argue that your solution is the first thing that needs to be done before we get to another major solution. After you've discussed your solution, you want to go ahead and address the opposition. And this tends to be a little bit complicated for people, so I went ahead and I listed some possible oppositions that people might have. So people could oppose your problem, like they might say this is not a real problem, or this problem does not really matter. There are bigger problems out there. Or they could also oppose your solution. And here I went ahead and I included possible oppositions for your solution. Like for example, some people might say, well, it costs too much money, we cannot afford it. Or somebody could say that would not really solve the problem. So go ahead and look at this list, and maybe one of these would work for your essay. Also keep in mind that you do need a rebuttal. So let's say people say we cannot afford it. What would you respond to those people, right? Or if you, like for example, if we look at the parking issue, some people might say this: I am comfortable with the way things are. So your rebuttal could maybe say, yes, you're comfortable now, but things can get worse, right? Or if you say, if your opposition says, well, it would take too long to build that parking lot you are proposing. I'm not even going to be here in 2 years. Your rebuttal could respond and say, well, what about any relatives? Or don't you want DACC to just be better? Right? This is going to benefit future generations. So you want to go ahead and make sure that you have a rebuttal for your opposition. And then finally, your conclusion, you are going to go ahead and restate your main points, restate your thesis and your reasons. And you also want to provide a call to action. And what I mean by this is you want to go ahead and motivate your audience to take action, to actually go out there and act on your solution. One of the things you do want to be careful with is you want to avoid cliches. Like, you don't want to say something like, go out there and be all you can be the beacon of hope. You know, avoid cliches like that, because if you include cliches like that, your audience might find it funny and they might not take you as serious, and they might not take you seriously because you're using cliches. So try to figure out a way to motivate people to act without being cheesy or using cliches. Finally, one of the things you want to remember is you need one source and you should cite it in APA. You can use more than one source, but the reason why I only required one source is because some of you might be writing about a neighborhood problem or a local problem, and it's really hard for students to find a lot of resources on that, on local or neighborhood problems. So because of that, I am only requiring one source. But if you're writing about a problem that has a lot of information out there, then by all means go ahead and use more than one source. The other thing I wanted to show you was the proposal outline. I went ahead and I included an outline. That way you can kind of go ahead and see how you can organize your essay. So here we have some examples. After you've chosen your topic, you want to go ahead and write an introduction and include the thesis. Here I went ahead and I included a thesis. Like I said, your thesis should be specific and it should contain the problem and the solution. So here's an example of a thesis. Although teen pregnancy has declined over the years, it is still too high. Thus, schools should implement a mandatory sex education class for grades 9 through 12. So as you can see, I state the problem, and then my solution is specific. I am talking about a mandatory sex education class, and I am specifically stating for what grades. And then after that, like I said, you can go ahead and follow the outline, which I discussed when I was going over the instructions, but here I break it down a little bit further. So definitely go ahead and take a look at this so that you can go ahead and organize your paper. And like I said, with this, it's really up to your own discretion how long this is. Like, for example, stating the problem, this might take 2 paragraphs, 3 paragraphs if your problem is too complex. The solution might take 2 paragraphs if your solution is very intricate and requires a lot of detail. But for the most part, this is a general outline that all of you can follow when writing your essay. The last thing I want to show you is the actual proposal essay assignment. So this is where you're going to submit it, and I wanted to show you the rubric because here you can see the rubric and you can see what the point attribution is. So if you're wondering how will she grade this essay, you can go ahead and take a look at the rubric and you will find that information there. So please let me know if you have any questions. I would love to hear from you. Also let me know if you have any concerns or issues coming up with a problem. We are going to do a writing exercise where you actually propose and submit your problem. So once I look at those, I will go ahead and tell you if your topic works for the essay or if it doesn't work. So like I said, please let me know if you have any questions, and I hope you have a great day.